Hi there, hello, my name's Lines, great to see you. Now, today we're doing another one of the 1-to-1 speed draw-alongs. Now, for those of you who've been waiting in the next part in the series of the in-depth anatomy ones, which is going to be the neck and shoulders, that one is underway. I've decided to, like all things, do feature creep to the point where it goes from a 10-minute video to essentially a book. Why do I do this? I don't know, but I'm going to keep doing it. Now, for today's drawing, we're going to be drawing this, which you can see, but I can't due to the wonders of editing. I'm trying a bit of a new format thing here, where instead of recording the drawing and then going and recording the audio separately, I'll see if I can get this one out the door a little bit quicker by doing both at the same time. But maybe this will be an absolute disaster and I won't end up using it. Let's see what we can do. So to begin with then, I've got my canvas set up here, roughly A4, thereabouts, and I'm going to start sketching in the character's base shapes using a nice red brush. So I'm just getting here, and I'm going to do a basic circle there. For the sphere, for the head, like the look of that, that's a pretty nice looking circle. It's a bit rough, but it doesn't really matter. Now, I'm going to go down and do sort of where I think the curve for the body should be. And I'm just going to go with about there, I reckon. That, and sort of torso, do the rib cage in there. I'm going to do a relatively big rib cage for a character. I know I do typically sort of small ones, but for this one, there's going to be a lot of stuff to support on this this rib cage here. So I'm going to give myself a decent amount of real estate. So I've got things to sort of put everything on and hang it from. So I'm just going to widen that out a little bit. Actually, that's what I'll do. Give myself a little bit more real estate there. Like I said, I just need a bit more sort of space to put everything. Right-a-rooney. And I'm going to have a very, very baggy shirt over the upper body. So I'm not going to do a lot of detail there. But first thing I'm going to do then, before I get into that, is set myself an eye line. So this will be a character that's looking slightly away and slightly up. And I'll set my sort of side plane of the head here and my center line down the front, like that. Alright, and then I'm going to go over and do the eyes in. So I'm going to dig where I think the eyes should be dug into the head, because the eyes sink in. The brow sticks out, and the nose sticks out, and the mouth digs in. And now what I'm going to do is this sort of section here of the ball for the head, whenever I'm doing an anthro character, I sort of treat the lower half of the face like it's like a drawer that comes out, like that. Like you've got a sort of spherical cabinet, and you're pulling out this sort of little drawer here. Right? And that's what I'm going to do here. Now this is a fairly high angle, low angle rather, and it's coming fairly straight towards the viewer, so it'll be a bit of a delicate one. It won't come out sideways very much. And I'm going to narrow it towards the bottom a little bit. So I'm going to make this one a bit more sort of feminine coded with the DreamWorks animation school of making things girls or boys, where you make the eyes big and the chin small to make it look like a girl, and then you make the eyes small and the jaw big to make it look like a boy. And it seems very simplistic, but it's how they do. Alright, I'll just get that there. And now next I'm going to do is mark out where I want the neck, ears to be, sorry. And so what I'll do for that is I'll use these lines for the eyes, and I'll make guidelines up and over the head here to make a mark there and there. And then I'll make one from the side, probably around here. I'll sort of draw it out from the back of the head. And then I'll have a line parallel with the eye line to make sure that the tops of the ears are relatively parallel, like that. So then, when I draw them in, from these parallel points here, and then down, I should have ears that are roughly in the right position. Go and bring down there. All right, Rooney. All right, let's get the rest of the base volumes. I'll have the trunk of the neck. I'll have that coming in here. Remembering that the trunk of the neck, actually a little bit wide. I might narrow that in a little bit. The trunk of the neck will be straight, and then you'll have the collarbones that come from the tops of the shoulders into the center contour of the rib cage. Remember, it's the center contour which comes out here, not the actual visual center, which would be along here, because since this is turned around, that center has moved out a little bit. Now, that, and then about 2/3 of the way down the neck, I'm going to have the little traps come out there, or it's the lat. No, I think these are traps. I'm just got the traps and lats mixed up. It's like June and July. It's just very silly. You have these two things right next to each other that keep getting mixed up. Although they do also get sort of September and October mixed up, so it might be a bit of both. So that's that there. Now, next thing I'll do where I want the arms to be. Again, the arms are going to have a big sort of baggy shirt over them, so I'm not going to put a lot of detail in them because I don't want to spend a lot of time doing detail. I'm just going to end up hiding So I'm just going to do them out like that, and then the body in there. It'll be sort of where the pelvis would be down there. Alright, Rooney. So I'll tighten that up a little bit too. Alright, with those base shapes in, I can start doing some of the more detailed shapes. So first one I want to do is the boobs. So with the when we draw the boobs, one thing you got to remember is however big they are, you'll have the mass of them will take up half the distance between the bottom of them and the collarbones, and then they'll sort of taper. So if you imagine you've got the rib cage here, like this, and the boobs come down to there, this half between the collarbones and the top will be for the mass of the breasts, like that, and then the rest of it will be for the bit that tapers up, right? And this will be true no matter what sort of height they are. So if you had them, there you go, and we're drawing them again, but this time they were just silly, silly huge, which is what I'm going for here. And the shoulders in there, like that. Then, half the distance then between the collarbones and the top, and I'll have the boobs come out, like that. And so that round mass will be in the lower half, and then the rest of it will be that tapering shapes that come up into the shoulders and collarbone, like that. Rightio? So that's my sort of general rule. It'll happen for small ones, big ones. That's sort of how it works. It's a good way because, you know, in the end, gravity always wins. So, with that in mind, draw the rest of the boobs in. So I'll start here with this sort of upside down love heart shape. I'll have my mass of the boob here, which is going to be just a humongous one. Go. And another one out this side as well. I'll really have it sort of come out and disturb that silhouette. Just let yourself go crazy. Really drawing a sort of a pink dog person or wolf person, so anything we do beyond that, that's freestyle, that's whatever we like. And now the next thing I'll do is from the collarbones here, the upside down love heart comes to a point in between them, and then halfway along them, I'm going to do the line that comes around to the edge of the pectoral, which is actually what that part of the breast is. It's the mass of the pectoral coming down and around, which makes up the rest of the mass of the boob, like that. And I'll smooth those shapes out when I start actually doing the detail. So, now I could do the inside shapes on the boobs, I'm not going to because it's going to be a big old shirt across them there. Alright, so that's those. Now, next thing I'm going to do is work out roughly where I want to do the hair. So for the hair, what I might do is I'll grab myself a different color for this part of the sketch, just so I can make the parts sort of distinguished from each other. So what I'll do is I'll grab a blue here, and I'll start then on some of the shapes. So once I've got the color that I want to use, my blue here, and so I'll start doing out my just rough idea of where I want the volumes to be, like maybe out there, maybe outside of that sort of shape. I just want to get my rough idea for the volumes I'm going to be dealing with, and maybe out around there, because I like to have a bit of a long hair on the character here, so a bit there, and sort of some curl up and around, and maybe sort of smooth there and in. Actually, I might move everything over a little bit to the left, just to give myself a little bit more real estate. Yeah, just got a bit more sort of room to breathe. Right, so then down, actually, a little bit of curl up here, that might be nice. And then a bit of a wave down. I'm really trying to make sure I've got that organic rhythm where I don't have any repeating shapes, any repeating sizes of sections. And I might have just a bit of a tail in the background as well, just a little bit there. And I'll pale that one out. That's going to be done on a sort of separate layer to make sure it sort of behaves a bit differently from the rest of the image. Now for that, that's roughly where I need that to be. I'm going to start doing in some of the idea for where I want the hair to come over the face. Maybe like there, maybe a big bit that comes down like that. I was just watching that new PSG, and they've got that wonderful sort of banana hairdo that Patty has, which I think looks fantastic. Right, and now I'll do the basic details. That's my base volumes, right? I've kept it zoomed out. I've stayed in a fairly large brush, and the reason for that is it keeps me from getting sort of stuck into the detail too early. So now what I can do is I'll lower the opacity down on that one. I'll grab a new layer with the new layer button, which is here. There we go. And I'm just going to narrow my brush by just one little click, and I'll start sort of roughing in what I want for the shapes. And I might start on the eye detail. So what I'll do then is just very simply, I've got my start point and my end point for it, and I'm going to decide on my shape. And what I can tend to do is I'll make a little grid for myself, like this. Oops, there you go. Aha. And divide it into 6. This is just for when I've got an eye shape that I want, I'll have a little rule for myself to keep it consistent. So I'll have, for instance, this one, I'll have it go up and then across by 2 and then in by 2, and I'll smooth that out, and that'll give me a consistent way of doing this eye at different bits of perspective. So if I've got it foreshortened like this, I can still see where it needs to come up by 1, down by 2, and in by 2, and then I can sort of smooth that out, and I'll have that same sort of eye shape at whatever angle I need to do it at, and that can be very handy. Right, now with that done, let's get rid of that. Do the eye in, so I'm going to have it be in at first, and then out and down. And same bit here. Side there, I'll do nice sort of spiky outy bits on the side. And probably have them looking off and up to the side. I think that would be nice. And then I've got the nose. Actually, I'll do the other eye first. Get the eyes done, then I'll move on. Be more organized. This one's going to be drawn a little bit narrower. And then the nose there, roughly. So I've got that sort of front plane. There, there's a sort of smaller nose, like that. And again, I'm going to keep zoomed out, stay loose, and don't get too sort of caught up in detail. Because if you get caught up in detail, you can end up sort of doing the detail elements, and it sort of nails you down to having the detail there. It's like building something. Once you start building, you're not planning. And so this is very much my sort of planning stage, where I'm just sort of getting my bits in the right order and in the right places roughly, so that I can then do the rest of the image and worry about the detail when I get in. Oh, that looks a bit wonky. That's okay. I'm just going to get the base bits in, and I'll straighten it up in a minute or two. Like that, maybe. Yep. There we are, and for the rest of it, I'll have the hair coming over like that. I might come in with the lasso in a minute and just sort of straighten some of those parts up. For now, I'm just getting an idea of where I want the bits, and I'm being very loose with this, very freeform with it. There, I'll let that ear leave the frame a bit, and I'll have move it there, and a bit of a tuft in there again with that organic rhythm, and maybe an eyebrow would be nice. There's a point here where the hair joins like that. All right, and come in from the side and do a little sort of hair tufty bits there. Let's erase that out a bit, just smooth that there, and a bit more in like that. I'll have a sort of point for the chin, which should be around there, I reckon, and try and smooth those lines to and from, and then I'll have the neck coming down, and then there's these muscles here that come from the corners in between there. You probably won't show these with line art, but I'm marking this out so that I know where to put my shading for when I describe that with a bit of shading later down the line. And so then I'll have the shoulder here. I'm going to have maybe a t-shirt hanging down a bit like that and sort of off one shoulder, because I think that looks just grand. There, and there's the seam would be about there, maybe? There, maybe a bit further down. Yeah, about there. Right, and then have that come off and leave the page. I'll have a bit of a crease there. All right, then coming back up to the shoulder. I just want to move down too quickly. I'll have the rest of the shirt there. So remember, leave this little gap for the seam around the sort of what do you call the neck hole, the sort of thicker stitchy bit. Seam there, and then for the boob, I'll have a couple of creases here where it turns into the pectoral before actually coming down around like this. But now I'm just going to have the shirt come straight down and sort of hang and drape down like that. Now it's not going to hang directly down, but I'm going to hang it down enough. And a lot of these shapes I'm doing here, they're not to be made into line art. They're just sort of to mark out where I want them to be when I start doing shading. So this is to inform not just my line art, but also my shading. There we are. And thicken that up a little bit just to really disturb the silhouette. And then also disturb the silhouette with the sleeve here, which should be higher than the sleeve on the other side, because this is the shoulder's not sort of down. And then I'll have the curl there and around, maybe a little bit poking out, and maybe the tail tuft there, and sort of disagree with that direction. So now I'll just swap that over and give it reverse, that's looking okay. I might straighten up some of the eye detail there. So now that I've got the base shapes in, I'm just going to merge these together. I'll just do a bit of a sort of shoulder tuft as well, because I think shoulder tufts are nice. Looks pretty good, that'll do. All right, groovy. So I'm going to merge these two together. Alt-Shift-E, I think it's Alt-Shift-E, Alt-Shift-E. Yeah, there we go. And I'm going to zoom in now. So now that I've got the base shapes, now I'm going to let myself zoom in. I'm not going to zoom in unless it's sort of ready for me to zoom in, because if I get into the detail before I've got enough info there, I'm going to end up sort of selling myself, up the river, because I won't have set myself up right, and I'll sort of start on the detail when it's too early, basically. So, let me get my brush again. I'll just partially erase. I've got my eraser. I'll go very softly, because I still want to be able to see the shapes I was working with, but I want to be able to add a bit more to them. So here I'm just going to go in and finalize some of these. I might shrink my brush down a smooch too. Maybe one or two. But I don't want to use too small a brush too early, because it's very hard to resist sort of adding detail when the brush is set up to be detailer. If you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so if you've got a really fine brush, everything's going to look like a detail element. But you don't want to be doing detail too early, because that can sort of set you on the wrong sort of path. I'm just going to do this here. And a little bit of the eye on the underneath there. I'm not going to do too much with it. I want to have a much heavier sort of brow on top than I want on the bottom. And then sort of brow there, looking okay. Alrighty, and then I might do a bit of a little ridge here. That sort of bridge of the snout, or bridge of the nose. I'm not sure what the terminology is. I'm out of the loop with this. I do feel like a bit of a tourist when I do anthro characters, but I'm doing my best here. I appreciated both Lola Bunny and Maid Marian and what's the blue fox? The blue fox from Star Fox. Crystal. There we go. So I'm not completely averse to the notion. I might just bring this upper lip a bit. Now, with the way I do the mouth, I'll have the smile coming up towards the eye. That's the sort of the target point there. And if I'm doing a canid or a sort of wolf or whatever, then I'll have the chin be very narrow. But if I'm doing like a big cat, they'll have a much sort of thicker chin section. So the way you proportion these sections of the face can be a big part of what decides like how it reads to the viewer. So this one I'm just going to do that there. And then mouth coming out, maybe a bit more from the side. And down like that, and around in. I'll follow this contour from there. I'll try and be more rounded with it, I think. I don't want it to sort of come in too much. And I'll have the fang here. So these sort of corners here are the corners that stick out, because that's where the fangs sit, and that can be a good way to sort of figure out where's a good spot to pop them. And another one here, coming down from that corner, like that. And then we do a simplified bar for the teeth across, like that. And then from the bottom, same thing. Fang and a simplified bar, like that. And then the tongue in the mouth. That should work okay. Oh, I forgot to put the pupil in the iris in this eye, so I'll just pop that in there now. There we go. Alrighty, and then the eyebrow, that's working okay. Come over to the side here, let's get the bits of the ears done, so there'll be a nice line that comes out and down like that. And every time I have these bits, I'll have a little bit of a tuft to begin them, just so I'm making sure I've got that sort of bit of colour in place. And so here I'll have that line down and up and tuft that out. And make sure I've got big section, tiny section, just to make sure it looks really sort of organic and sort of fluffy. So I'll thin that section down then of the ear, and then start these. I'll have a really small bit here to lead into a nice sort of big section. I'll try to have a different sort of shape language to these two. So I'm going to try and have a bit more angularity to these bits of the hair. So I've got that communication of sort of difference of shape and placement. There's a big section there. I'll have this bit coming over like that. And on the face, I might sort of direct that one more down and in, make it more sort of bunch of bananas-y. Go, a bit over there, and down past here. Right, that's looking okay. I'll move down a little bit, and I want the chin to come out to about there. That's my sort of contour point there. So now I'll just pull this in here. Normally, I'd actually recommend you rotate your canvas when you're doing these bits, but I'm not going to, just because it makes the video hard to read. But if you want to do that, turn that on silent there, see if that came up in the recording. We're going to find out. Journey of discovery. All right, there we go, and put you on side there. Lovely. All right. And come down and this side here, and just big tuft, little tuft, tiny one in, and then go for a sort of smoothish shape to the jaw. I probably don't actually need to do line art for that part of the jaw there, just because it's a relatively high angle, so I don't feel like it's entirely necessary, but we'll see what we need to do. And so across there to there, so probably should come about there, so it's got a sort of even point for the mass to be. Like that, so sort of tuft that out there at its thickest point. Looking good. And then I'll have this line here just to show the difference between the sort of hair and the face, even though their face is covered in hair or fur or... I don't know. Is that facial hair? That's the big question. All right, there, and what do you call it? They have a beard. That's one of the big questions here. All right, and then I'll have that. I'll have the little choker thing that I think looks lovely and should always be added. Go. Lovely. All right, and then curl out shapes here and there as well. All right, moving down, I might partially erase a lot of this. Not that I really need to. A lot of these shapes are pretty much what I want them to be, but I'm just going to sort of shore them up a little bit and sort of detail them a bit as well. I want to make sure that everything's sort of landing the way I want it to. So let's have a looky there. Right, so I think I'll do a bit more detailing on maybe the shirt needs it. Yeah, so I'll start the seam here, and I'll actually pull in this shoulder because that's coming up a bit high. And I'll let it be a bit more flat. And then here I'll put that collarbone there. And again, these lines here, they're not for inking. This is for inking, but you can see there's this line up here that I use for constructing the boobs. But now I'm going to have that just become this bit here. I still want that line, because I'll be using that to do like the contour for when I'm doing the shading, but it's not part of the actual line art. So keep in mind, a lot of the shading you do will be based off your sketch, just like your line art will be. But your sketch is there for multiple stages. It's there to inform your line art, first of all, but after that, you still want to use it to inform things like your shading for some of those volumes where you don't actually have any sort of overlap or fold, but you're still going to have that disturbing the shape, and you're still going to want to have shading there to describe it, but it may not necessarily require some line art. And I'll put a bit of a corner on that. One more page. I do have more page there. Have the come down like that. That works. And there we go. And all right, I'll do a bit of a tuft here. Actually, I feel like a little tuft there looks nice. One there, and maybe down here. And I'll have them as a way of sort of following that contour down between the boobs, and then one there, like that, and there. Right, groovy. And one crease here and one crease there, and just smooth that line out and straight down, like that. And maybe a bit of line there, just to point up towards the points of tension, because the sort of central mass of the boob will be the sort of the primary point of tension. Oh, goodness me. There you go. That there. Now I'll put more down here and a bit of a crease along there. And come down and do the same thing around here. Alright, so those shapes. Now these ones are looking fine. The shoulder can just come down because I've got the shirt on. A little bit of a divot there for where that sort of seam is on the clothing, but otherwise I think I'm good to start inking. 22 minutes. Yeah, I reckon it's pretty respectable. I might do a little bit of a crease here for the eye. Sort of mark that out. And I also want to kind of remember what sort of section I want for where I'm going to do the two different colors. I think I'll do maybe like the eye section and the lower face as a sort of cream color. And then maybe the front of the neck. And I can use this sort of muscular line there as a sort of guideline. If I follow the markings along some of these points, that can really help. So I'll do this, maybe do it halfway along the boobs. That might be nice. And there and up over the collarbones. I'm sort of marking it out more for myself than anything else. Right. Okay. And now with that, I might thin the jawline in just a little bit. On a human character, I wouldn't have the chin be that close to the edge of the open mouth, but with an anthro character like this, one of the animalistic things I might do is I'm going to have that sort of what's the word for it? Canid kind of mouth, where they've got the jaw is quite narrow on the chin, and so I'm going to have a very narrow chin on this one as well, I think. Right, and then maybe sort of an idea of where I want those contours to be, but otherwise we're good to move on to the inking. So lower down the opacity on that. I'm going to grab myself a new layer, switch myself to black. I'm going to put my smoothing all the way up. Now I'll find a good sort of thickness here that I like. So that might be a little bit too thick. I might narrow that down a smudge. A little more. One more. Maybe one more. Yeah, that's looking alright. Alright, so here, this bit of the sort of exercise does get a bit mechanical. So I'm just sort of drawing these lines in and down where I want there to be line art, and I don't necessarily have to have line art everywhere. I can do some of this with some other detailing or just edges of different sort of colours or bits of tone. Right there, and the hair coming down. One thing I've got to be careful of is if I follow these lines as I go, I can end up being a little bit disorganized with how I do my inking. So I've just got to make sure that as I go, I'm returning back to the top and I'm going from sort of top to bottom. It seems like, no matter where you ink, it should be fine, but one of the things you'll notice is that if you have a really methodical process, your stuff won't take as long. You will be much quicker. And so part of that means, here's a bit I've missed. I want to add a bit of a little sort of point there to the top of the ear. But yes, if you're more methodical, you'll notice that your work goes much quicker, you get more works done, and since improvement comes as a matter of how many works you finish, not necessarily the sort of quality of each individual work, although that is part of it, but you want to make sure you're not sort of spending forever trying to tune one piece of work in, but rather you're trying to get a bunch of them done, and that way you get a bit of sort of experience points from each one, and you get better and better and level up much faster if you focus on getting a lot of works done rather than just trying to refine a single work for hours and hours on end, because that's a trap we all fall in. Right, a bit of a flip. Yeah, that's alright. Right, there we go. Right, there. So I'll start doing the shape of the face. I'll do it very straight in there. A little bit of a tuft there, and in. And one sort of errant tuft coming off on the side there, but otherwise I'll get in and I'm going to rotate this just so I get this angle right. It's much easier to do some lines at an angle. That. Oh, no, I don't like that. That's better. Right, and then tuft there, and there. Right, lovely, let's get those facial details in. So I'll have the sort of eyebrowy shape here. Oops, daisy. Along there. And then the crease above it. And I'm not going to fill these in with black just yet. I've got a second pass I do with my inking where I will add line weight. You can add line weight as you go. That's your jam, by all means. I don't have a good enough sort of brain for that. I've got to break things down for myself into a much sort of more manageable, small, easy to chew bits for my smooth brain. So I'm just going to do these and I'll come back in and I'll thicken them in a bit. Go. There. I might do the pupil. Oops, daisy. Pupil outline now. That. And I'll come in and do the darker bits as I go, and maybe a little couple of specks here for sort of disconnected eyelashes underneath, there and there. Start doing the shape of the nose. I'm going to do a very sort of simple sort of nose. I'm not going to do the too much detail. I'm going to do a very sort of cartoony one there. But, whatever kind of thing you're into, by all means, go with your particular artistic deity and what they command. Go there and this down and around. I'm trying to be nice and smooth with this. And then I'm going to round these off a bit. I don't want too much sort of really sharp shape language. The fangs can be a bit rounded. I'm sure they'll work just fine. Right, and then the mouth comes down like that. And there. And round. And another bit there for that sort of fangy bit. Looks okay. Ruby, moving down. I'll have the neck coming in like that. And out to there and off to the tuft. And then on this one here as well, that's going to come down and it's going to meet the inside of that shirt, which will come over and make sure I've got that disturbed silhouette, that little mark at the side there. I'll have the collarbones. Collarbones are super duper important. Never skip collarbones. Maybe we'll do a little bit of line for that there. And then for here I'll have tuft, little tuft, huge tuft, tiny tuft. No, that tiny tuft looks bad here. No, don't love that. I am going to cope with that. Right, this one here, so around and down. Yep, there. And around and down, and again, disturbing that silhouette with the seam on the shirt, and now I can join the two together. This. And I'll leave that broken up, because I'll do a lot of the detail of the seam there with a bit of shading instead, because I don't want it to be too hard of a black line. I don't want it to be sort of grabbing too much attention. Now, speaking of attention, so draw a huge curve there, and down, and there, and the shirt coming down in there like that with a bit of a crease. And the rest of these internal folds, I'm going to do them, like I said before, with an area of tone. There, like that. And a bit of the arm coming out there. Right, lovely. Going back up, make sure I don't miss anything. So I've got the choker here. Oh, it's a very slight upward curve. Very, very slight. A little excessy bit there that I've gone over. And there, and up, and down, and that will do. And over the shoulder here, so I'll zoom out for this bit because it's fairly straightforward stuff. Over and out the shoulder like that. And, oh no, I've got the seam there, hang on. Over and out the shoulder. Oop, the seam, and there. It's a little thing, but those little bits of communication of material can make a really big difference with communicating the outfit or the character as a whole. So push that down in there, maybe a little line there. And then I'll have this sort of section there. And I didn't know the arms on the sketch, I'm just going to draw that there. Oh, no, we'll do that just there, just simple enough. That's good enough. And then the hair that's coming around the side, and then the bit of the tail that's coming around there. Alright, groovy. Oh, and the sort of ear tuft here. And that's my next step is going to be, I'm going to quickly toggle the ink on and off. And the reason I'm going to sort of toggle it back on and off is to see which bits I have missed. So if you see a part of the image that sort of disappears when you do this, that tells you that a bit of it hasn't been included. So there's a bit there that's supposed to be in. The rest of it, I feel like I've actually gotten most of it. All right, next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to get the layer here, and I'm going to color it red or blue. Actually, blue will be fine. Turn off sketch. And I'm going to make a new layer. Now, the reason I'm doing this in 2 layers here is I want to be able to see where I have and haven't done my line weighting. So I'm going to add extra little bits of thickness here to any of the bits like in the creases, in the folds, in the sort of essentially ambient occlusion. So if you're familiar with ambient occlusion, it's anywhere that would be ambient occluded or anywhere that would be sort of hard to reach. Anywhere where objects get close to each other or become sort of narrow and cave-like. That's where I'm going to add these extra little bits of darkness to really communicate that sort of neutral light. You can do this with lighting, of course, but I like to do this as my way of sort of thickening my line art to give it a bit more character, and I thicken my line art to talk about the ambient occlusion light, whereas you get artists like John Garrett Mobius, who have, if you've seen these sort of drawing videos, you probably hear me mention him every time I do this, but you know, here we go again. And the way a lot of his light does is, his line art work is he's communicating his primary light source often with his line weighting by having the line weighting get thicker the more that surface faces away from light source. You'll see other artists like Mark Brunette, he does it as well often. He'll have the line art get thicker where the object is darker or less lit. Either it's because it's away from the light source or it's in a sort of darker scenario. It's not an always thing, but it can be a good way to communicate those extra black sections, especially when you're working with a sort of limited palette. You'll probably have like your line art, your flats, and maybe 1 or 2 other colors. But you won't have a sort of lot to work with if you're working in sort of cell shading style. So that there and a bit more in there, and there's not that much to do on this one, so it's pretty straightforward. There we are, a bit in there and under there as well. Nice thick bit there. And then these folds here as well. Groovy. Right, moving now, I'll put a little bit here and a little bit between these sort of tufty bits here. Yeah, not too much, I just want them to be a little bit darker there, and I might add a little bit more in here because it's going to be a big rounded object. Another sort of big object there, so it's going to get a fair bit, I reckon. Right, groovy. That's okay, I'll do a little bit down the side here, and then we can move on to our flats. Right. there, and a little bit more here, and the tail. No, we'll do the tail. Oh no, we'll do the tail. There we go. That, and a little dropping under there as well. Right, groovy. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'll make sure I get the extra bit of dark on the eyes. So this is what I talked about before, where some sections like this need to be done with a lot of black, and so there's no point in sort of splitting that while I'm doing it. But if I've got another sort of part of my process where I'm going over and doing a lot of sort of filling in with black, it makes sense to do this as part of that step. So I'm going to rotate this a little bit, fill that in, that. Pretty. And then a little bit on the inside of the mouth for a bit of ambient occlusion there. A bit more on the corners there, that's where it'll be at its darkest, and maybe a little bit there to sort of thicken that bit there. I just want to break up the line, because that should be the sort of, that smile bit there, but I want it to be a bit broken up, because I don't want it to be too, too sort of, maybe the word is literal? I can imply a lot of this and probably get a better result if I have it implied more than strictly described. I think that tongue should come down a bit closer to the front. That's a bit better. Right, groovy. Groovy. I might maybe have a thing there, maybe. Yeah, see how I feel. Alright, there, a little bit here, and with that I should be largely done. So now what I'm going to do is, just like I did with the sketch layer when I had the inking, I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to flick the ink layer on and off. And what this will do is you can see where I have done my little ambient occlusion bits and where I haven't. And that'll tell me if I've missed any bits. There. Alright, that's going to be good enough, I reckon. Looks good, looks good. Alright, lovely. So now, I'll merge these together, Alt-Shift-E. I'll go Control-U on the keyboard, and then I'll lower the luminosity all the way down, just to turn it all into black, and I've got my line art. So, on a layer under that, I'm going to make sure I name that, and go my ink. Right, so I've got my ink layer named. And so with that done, I can start filling in my flat colors. So I'm going to grab my new layer, which I'm going to call that Flats. And I'm going to grab my pink. There we go. So the pink wolf girl, so I want that maybe like more of a salmon. There we go. Yeah, maybe like a salmon color. Cool. I've got my bucket. I'm going to set mine to refer to other layers and close gaps, and I'm going to set myself up a little bit here with a pen tool. I'm just going to do a little bit of a closing of the gap here, just so the bucket doesn't have to fill too much. I have to come in and sort of edit that, so that there, and that should close that off. I don't think I have any other gaps worth worrying about. And there, I reckon. I should be alright with that. Now, bucket time. Boop, boop, boop. It's too pink, but that's okay. I'll tune that in a second. This is my primary color. There we go. And there, and that little bit there as well. Cool. Now that's too much. That's much too much. So I'm just going to lighten that a little bit. That, and I'll have that other color with it, the extra sort of layer of that more sort of pale cream color. But I just want to get this one here. And I have a slightly darker color, which is the one I actually already have. So I'm going to throw that down for the hair. Oh, a little bit darker still, maybe. So tiny shift in hue. A little bit darker there, and hopefully that'll make it pink, but still a significantly different enough pink that it'll stand out, and that's what I'm sort of after there. That's working okay. Lovely. Oh, the tail should be the skin pink, though, or the main fur pink skin. And I've got my ear over there that I've forgotten. Let's pop that in. All right, groovy. Now, next thing I want to do is the shirt. I'm going to go with almost white, and I want to leave just the tiniest bit of blue in there. The insiest winsiest bit, because I'll need that for later. That's a secret little tool that'll help us later. Alright, that's that. And then I'll do the choker, which I'll go for a sort of brown, which is actually orange, but low, very, very low saturation, dark color for that. And I might use that same color, but a little bit warmer for the nose. Maybe I'll do a pink nose, I don't know. What do you reckon? Pink nose? Like a similar thing, but in a sort of darker pink? Oh, yeah, that's much cuter. All right. And now, I might go for a bit more of purple lower tone for that, just to separate it out. Ah, there we go, that's better. All right, so now I'm going to grab my blue. So I'm going to go with a a darker blue. I'm going to do this highlights for it in a sort of cyan color. So it's not going to be that color there forever, but I'm going to lift it up with some cyan when I get the glow. And now for the inside of the mouth, I'll go for a much more warm kind of orange. Not quite orange. Oh, sorry, warm red, so not quite orange. There, not quite. There, yeah, that's it. And the inside of the mouth as well. Lovely. Now I've got some areas of white here, but you notice they're not white, they're just lack of paint. So what I'm going to do, if I just grab white and fill it in, you'll see it bleeds out a little bit with the way that brush works, and I don't want to do that. So what I'll do is I'll hold down Control, I'll click on my flats layer, that'll make a selection out of it. I then flip the selection, and what that means is I can only do paint bucket where there aren't already pixels. And so this is a great way, if you don't want it to bleed out and have to sort of correct those edges, just to get that done. And it's also a great way to check to see if you've done your actual flat by turning off your paper layer, and if things go checkerboard, you've missed a spot. Alright, so that's that there. Now, flip that around, so it's the other way around. Looking good? Looking good? Good, good, good. Right. So those are my base flats. I'll turn that on there because that checkerboard pattern's a little bit harsh on the old Iaroonies. So just line that up. Now, the next thing I want to do is add my secondary colors. So this character here has 2 tones to their fur, right? So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to have another cream color on top. So I'll grab a new layer, and I'll clip it to that layer, and I'm going to grab this flats layer here, I'm going to hit this button here. That's going to set it as a reference layer. And so now when I get my magic wand tool, I go to refer a selection for referred layers, and now when I make a selection, it'll make a selection based on those solid colors. So if I make a selection there, I've only selected the sort of skin tone pink, and I can go over with the cream color that I had in mind. Sort of there. What sort of color is this? Maybe paler, a little bit paler. Yeah, it's better. That's better, much better. Right. And I'll get around the eyes here. That. Around there from the brow, the edge of the brow. Down, and then I'll have this come back in like that. And then on the other side of the eyes here as well. I'll really sort of tighten that in. I'll get rid of that section there. I'll zoom in so you can see it a bit direction. There we go. Yeah, around there, and then down and there. In, out. In, out. And a bit more around the roundness of the face, and I'll sort of try to follow the contours of these sort of tufts I've set up. Just roughly. I don't want to have to sort of stick them too tight, but I want to have them sort of be included in another element of the image. So in this case, I want to make sure that they're included in the way I've done this sort of extra bit of tone here. So take that out and in. Move down the image. A little bit more down the front of the neck here. And then between the two, following in between the collarbones. And then I'll have it sort of follow out in that sort of upside down love heart shape I used to draw the boobs. And I'll follow that out there, but I'll just narrow it in a little bit so I can have that bit of contour there, because I think that contour looks nice. Right, and then the same thing around here, a bit more on the tail, so a little bit there. And you can see with a brush like this, getting a sharp edge is very straightforward because I just switch from erasing the brush to drawing the brush. And so that's how I can get a really big brush to just really fine shapes. It's really handy. Actually, I'll get rid of that. I don't want that to be too big. Better. Those bits there. Lovely. Alright, that's that. That's probably all I really need. So now I can move on to maybe my shading. So I'll grab a new layer. I'll control click on my flats. On my shading layer, I'm going to make a layer mask there. Just means I don't have to worry about shading outside the edges. I'm going to pick a fairly sort of light, low saturation purple, I think. And I'll use that as my shading layer. Put it back over here. I'll set it to multiply. Oh, not darken, multiply. Oh, actually, before I do that, I might add a little bit more of that cream color to the ears, actually. I'll quickly grab that. Fill in just a bit more there on the inside of the ears, just to make them a bit more interesting. You don't have to, but I just thought, looking at it there while I had a quick sip, that I might... Oh, it's a daisy. Oh, goodness me. That's not what I want to do. There we go. Alright. C, not X. There we go. Nope, that's that problem again. C. No, that's not it. That's what I want to do. There we go. There we go. There we go. A bit more there. A little bit in there, I reckon. I won't go too crazy with it because I want to be here forever. And I'm sure you don't want to be here forever. Things to do. Places to see. Alright, next thing, I'll go to that shading layer I've made. And I'll get my pale, sort of desaturated purple. And what I can do is I'll use that selection tool to make a selection of each section and then do the shading bit by bit. So I'll do the hair first of all. So I'll do things like some contour in here, like this, and then a little bit along here, that. Get rid of that there. And I probably don't need the selection for this actually, so I'll just brush that in. In and erase it out. And same thing here, I'll brush it in, that, and then I'll erase it out to narrow it. It's a much better way of having control over, well, for me, your brushes. If you brush it in and then erase it out, and you just press C on the keyboard to switch your brush from painting to being an eraser. And it can be really handy to do just because you might want, to be doing maybe some line art, and then when you want to erase it, you want to erase it with a really clean edge. So you just switch your line art brush to a line art eraser brush. Or maybe you're doing some really soft shading and you want to sort of soft erase. So press C and your soft shader then becomes a soft eraser. It's a really handy way to engage with the tone on your piece. So you can just use the same brush at the same size and everything's already sort of set up for you. Yeah, there. In fact, I might shade this whole thing out actually. So I'm just going to grab my wand, grab there, and brush and just get rid of all that. Yeah, and just shade that out. I might even make the brush really big for a second. Get rid of all that. There we are. And move over to this side. So I'll have a bit of that shadow drop there on the hair from the ear. And then I'll get some bigger areas. I'll have like a shaded area like that. And I'll just cut the edge out. And then another area here. And I'll have these shaded bits get bigger and bigger. And the unshaded bits get narrower and narrower as a way of sort of showing that gradient effect of having it get darker and darker as it moves away from that lit section. And I'll get a very narrow one and do a couple of bits of hair contour. Today, that I reckon that'll work. There, put it in, and then brush it out. Like that. Have that difference in thickness there. Right, and moving down, I'll do the same thing. I'll make sure that I don't have too much regularity in my shapes. I'll make sure the shading gets thick and thin and comes all the way out and then all the way in. And then I'll make it a bit smaller, a little bit of contour along there as well. And then, of course, erase it out so I can give it that more sort of organic variability of thickness. Alright, I'll get rid of some of that there as well to keep that contour shape intact. And here I'll do probably some very brutish bits of shading. So I just want to sort of shade the rest of this out and sort of deprioritize. So I'll just have probably a couple of bits there. Shade the rest out, just send it all back. Lovely. Right, that's that. Moving on then to the face color. So Control D, deselect that, and I'll grab my paler color, and now I can start shading this. Now one of the things you'll notice is that this purple over the top of the pale color here is going to look a bit wonky, and that's okay. We're going to fix that in a second, so for now we're just marking out where the shading will be. So I'm going to send this whole ear back. That. And here I'm going to have just a little bit there. This shading is a bit overpowering now, but it won't be in a second. Just going to do that. For now, I'm just marking out where I want the shading to be. Keep in mind it's going to be paler and much better balanced in just a second. There. And cut some more out. Moving down, I'll have this outer bit of the ear here. A bit of shading, and I'll break up the edge of the shading to match those sort of bits of the tuft there. Groovy. I'll have a bit of shading here under the eyebrow. Get rid of that there, just pale it out. And then a little bit for that eye crease there as well. And the eye crease over here, which I forgot about. Oh, the eyebrow too. Oh, whatever. And then more under there. And then shade around here, just where the hair is shading over the face. Okay, pale that in. Again, it will look a bit overpowering until it gets straightened up, but don't worry, that'll be fine. And then, of course, the shadow dropped by the hair onto itself. I might deselect that there so I can go from one region of color to another without interruption. Right, and then I'll get the mouth in. And I might actually grab the eyes as well while I'm here. So I'm going to hold Shift and select those sections as well. So that way I can have that sort of bit of shadow that comes there, that the eyelash drops over the white of the eye. And then for the mouth, I'll have that all shaded in like that. And then I'll get rid of the shading on the teeth there. Keep the shading on that bit of the teeth. And I'll tail that in. Right-a-rinny. Leave the rest, I think. And Control D. And now let's grab the rest of the skin and sort of shade that in. I have most of, whoops-a-daisy, this shaded in there, because one of the big easy drop shadows you get on basically every figure is where the head will drop a shadow onto the neck. So I'm going to take advantage of that and have a shadow there, maybe pick up a little bit on the collarbones as well. And so then as I move down, soften that shadow a little bit maybe, I'm going to have some of these bits here marked out with some shading. So I don't really need the line art there, but I like a good strong set of definition for the muscles on the neck. I think they look nice. I just think they're neat. And then maybe a little bit of an ambient sort of bit of shading there, just this little tight bit there. It's going to be sort of lowly lit because of the closeness of the hair. And then here I'm going to do a bit of shading on this little tuft thing here. And again, it will look a bit overpoweringly dark, but you'll see in a second when we tune these colors in. For now, we're just sort of marking where we want this sort of cell shading-y solid shading to be. And we'll come in and fix the rest of it in a sec. Alright, now the next thing is the sketch can be really useful for looking at where you want to do some shading. So if you remember from the sketch, we had that upside down love heart shape for where we were defining those masses for the boob and where they join the pectoral. I'm going to use that now to do the gentle bit of shading for the boob. So I'm still on my shading layer, but I've got my sketch turned back on and up on the top just so I can have an idea of where those masses are. So I'll brush them in. I might have to redo that section near the tuft there, but that's okay. That, sort of a more smooth color, and then press C, and I'm going to start erasing it back out. Because I want a little gentle bit of tone there. I don't want a lot. I just want a sort of gentle bit that comes up towards there. Be very, very careful with it. Very, very gentle, but a nice sort of smooth grade as I go. And a bit there, and that sort of cleared that out pretty nicely. A bit more. It's pretty nice, that'll do. Right, groovy. And so, really hard, I'll turn the sketch off there, and that's that gentle bit of gradient there. And I've gone over this bit, so I'll just quickly clean up this bit of tuft here that I mucked up. I should have done that bit of the top edge of the boob there first, but working top to bottom, I wasn't planning my stuff, so lesson learned. Maybe. Right, and then here, again, there's that line for the pectoral. You can see that line there, so that's the one I'm going to be illustrating here. Turn that back off. And so I'm going to do a bit of a shading there that comes down towards the corner there, and then a bit more as it comes up the side of the boob here. And it joins that sort of gradient there, like that. And of course, the bit of the armpit there on the top of the arm is going to be sort of fairly dark, just because there's so much stuff sort of folding in and around it. And then shading on the side here. And a little bit of shading just along here to imply that sort of closeness of the different object there of the shirt. Look decent, and then I'm just going to shade this bit of the arm completely out. And for the tail, I'm just going to throw a little bit of tone on one side of it there. And I'll probably blur that out later. We'll get to that in a second. Alright, that's that step there. I'm also going to do a bit of shading on the eyes. There as well. And down, and down, and down, and down. Oops. Groovy. Next thing I'm going to do is the choker. Now the choker I should probably do a lot more with highlights than anything else. I'll grab my wand, select it, and I'm just going to put my darker sections in. So I'll start with two little sort of bands there to imply that sort of seam they'll have along the edge, where they're sort of folded over and stitched together. And then I'll start adding in some darker bits like here. And get rid of that. And then the side here, I'll let that sort of be just dark. In there, a lot of this I'm going to be communicating with highlights. Probably should pick maybe more blue tone for it, but more sort of overall warm colors for everything. So let's see if that was a mistake. We will see if that was a mistake. So maybe a bit more here, in, a bit better, and I'll have this bit here darkened as well, but slightly out of sync with the band below it. And then a little bit more darkening around the edges there. If you're interested in doing sort of shiny things, we've got a video on the channel about how to do shines. So that was my probably pretty cool resource. Alright, so control. Lovely. Alright, let's do the shirt. So the shirt's going to be a bit straightforward. So I might do the big gradient first. So I'm not sort of wrestling with it like I was on the bit of the boob there. So I'm going to start with the shading around here. Sort of zoom out so you can see. Like that. And I'll get my big smooth gradients first. And then I'll come in and do my more sort of detailed shapes. So I'm going to keep my two big areas like this. And this one's going to be a little messy, but I'm mainly just doing these to set that gradient. And I know it looks much too dark, but we'll get to that. Alright, so brush it in, and then press C on the keyboard to start gently taking it out, because I want to have that gentle sort of gradient on these big gentle shapes. That. I want the gradient to be sharper towards the edge there, and then out and down. It comes in like that. And then same thing here. So grade that out, down, and I'll go over this with some more clear, hard shapes to make the folds look right. But for the soft part of it, I just really want to have that in and nice and clean like that. So sort of gently shape that in. Okay. Then rest underneath it. That. And I know it looks too dark, I really do. But I promise you it'll be fine in just a sec. Alright, and now I've got that, I can start doing the harder shapes. So that would be things like these creases that come up here. But the reason I'm doing the big soft shapes first is that when I erase it, I make a hard edge to the eraser. And so since this soft area here, I want to keep that sort of, that softness, I'm doing the stuff that involves hard edges last. But you might want to do it the other way around, depending on sort of the construction pretty much. So keep that in mind, that when you do go over and erase it, you're going to change some of those gradients, and it can be hard to keep them sort of intact. Go a bit more on the shoulder there, and I'll sort of tuck that up there, and I might get a really small head here, and I'm just going to communicate the edge of the seam there with a little bit of paleness. Alright, now the other side, I'm just going to do, before I move on to that, I'm going to get my brush here real small, and I'm just going to do a bit of a line around here, that, just to communicate that seam. So you can see I can do it with a bit of shading rather than having to do it with my line art. There we go. And then just shade that whole thing out, and then I'll carve some bits out, because this one is mostly shaded, so I'll be better off carving out from shading, and we'll be sort of filling it in. So now with my eraser, get it small, and I'll sort of section here maybe, that, and then a little fold there, and down, and get that in, and fold there. And a little bit of a seam there. A bit more there, and I'll just sort of have a bit of a sort of internal fold shape there. You might just carve that out hard. Go over it. Easy. See? Right there, but I don't want it to be very strong, so I'm just going to shade the whole thing out. I just want to leave that little shape in there a bit. Yeah, that's what I want. Alright, cool. Alrighty. Now, like I mentioned before, this shading does look a bit harsh in some places. It's a bit too dark on the light tones. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of my flats. I'm going to call it Color Controller. Put that on the top so you can see what's happening to it. And, oops, what I should also do is I'll get a copy of this color variation and I'll merge that in. Alright, so I've got this, so that's this color, this here. It's got all my flats on it, that's what it is. Now, I'm going to go Control U, and I'm going to lower the hue a little bit, so it's a bit cooler, by about maybe 15, 20. And then I'm also going to lower the luminosity a touch as well, by about, whatever, 9 to 13. Right, and what that's going to do is if I clip that to my shading layer, you can see what happens. It basically controls all the colors in the shading layer. And now I can just shade with whatever I want, it'll come out roughly the right color. There's some fine tuning to do, like the shirt maybe could be a little darker, but overall, it's a good starting point. So with that then, I'm going to grab myself this one, and I might just go and grab the shirt area. I'm going to change the color control layer, and I'm just going to make it a touch darker. Not that much, not that much. And a little bit more colored, and slightly less green-blue. Or the blue. Yeah, it's looking good. Cool. See? And I'm going to grab myself another copy of my shading layer. I'll move that up. I'll delete what's on it. And I'm just going to go and duplicate the color control as well. I'll put one there. And now I'm just going to do a very quick couple of little bits of extra shading. Just extra little bits. In a couple of spots where I feel like it just needs to be a little darker. So I'm going to have a little bit just in here. And in behind there to really separate that out. And a couple of little bits of shading here for the hair. That. I'm just going to have some little splits and internal shapes. And a little bit under here as well. That. Go. And a bit under the chin. Because that under the chin shadow is really important. It's a big part of the sort of easily available bits of depth you get access to. So it's one of the best ones to use. And so I thoroughly recommend taking advantage of it if you can. And then maybe a little extra bit of darkness here in the corner there, and under the hair, and the center bit of the eye. That. Oh, and I'll grab then a little bit to pop the dark color over the nose there. And maybe a little bit of extra darkness around this bit of the collar, just for that extra contrast. I'm going to pop the highlight down. Probably all I want. I might maybe do a couple of little bits of internal sort of shading here. Just to sort of set some bits of contour there for the darker bits of hair. Look at that. There. And maybe a little bit on that side, which is where I forgot to do my shading at all. I'll grab that there. Just brush that in, and we can just forget that I forgot to do this during the right step. That's just what that is. And then there, a little bit more contour for that. Lovely. Right, cool. And that bit there as well. Did I show that bit? I did. Maybe on this bit. There we go. Wrong layer. Silly me. Right, groovy. It's those bits there. So that's looking okay. Now I'll do a couple of little extra bits of shading on the shirt as well. So here I'm going to throw a bit into this little seam here. Make sure that communicates. That's the wrong layer. There we go. Some selection going. Control D. Brush out. Yeah, it's nice. A little bit in the corners there, just to really push some of those folds. And I'll do a bit. Yeah, I wonder if I need to actually disturb some of that shading there. I feel like I need a bit of an angular, bit of the highlight section to fold this. I'm going to carve a bit of that out actually. Yeah, that's right. That's what it's going to do. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All right. Now, extra shading layer. I'm going to come in, and I'm going to throw a bit of extra shading here. That. Down the bottom of the image there, and nice sort of thick section of it, and then to make sure it's an organic rhythm, I'll really narrow a little stroke of it there. And then here I'm going to have some shading come down and sort of follow this contour down around the boob, so hang down there, and then just fill that in. Like that. Make it nice and smooth. There, and up and in, and then C, turn it into a eraser to sort of smooth some of those edges. I'll zoom in for this to be easier to see. There. There. I'll just do broad shapes in. I'm just going to pop them in and then carve them out. Smooth those shapes out. And then from there down. Looking good, looking good. And then a little bit of darkness in here. Just so there's that ambient occlusion going to be making it really, really dark in there. Lovely. And maybe a little bit in here. Just a smudge. To really sort of sell some of those creases. And there, maybe a little bit there, and a little bit along here to show that seam. Alright, that's looking okay. I'll make sure I've got these little bits here nice and neat. That's looking okay. I'll just sort of neaten some of these up as well. Now that I'm letting myself zoom in, I stay zoomed out where possible to sort of avoid getting stuck in detail, but I probably feel like I can do some detail if I want. I've earned it. Right. Looking nice, looking nice. Ruby. Now, let's grab some highlights. I'm going to grab a layer here. I'll grab a layer on top. I'm actually going to put a layer of highlights on top of my ink layer. Just in case I want to do shine over the top of something already inked. But, there, so I'm going to grab some brush in, and I'm going to lower the opacity on this one. This won't be my absolute whites, this will be my fairly white whites, or I might just do them with full opacity and then just sort of erase them out if I don't like how they look. So, yeah. They're too bright. I'm just using a normal layer with white. All I'm doing, nothing fancy. Well, what I might do is I might do control click on the flats and then control click on the line art, and that way I don't have to worry about leaving the image at least. There, on that, and there, and sort of carve that back out like that. A little bit more coming down around the hair there, and maybe a touch across the top. That'd be nice. And I'm probably going to pale this out a little bit so it's not quite as strong. So I know the white seems a little overpowering now, but that's okay. I'm going to straighten it up in a minute, I promise. And so I'm going to have the shine roughly follow a curve around here. So I'm just going to blob them in, and then I come in with the eraser version and just sort of move and scumble the shape around a bit, just so it's got that sort of more organic kind of shape to it. It doesn't look as much sort of brushed in. It looks like it's got its own shape based on, you know, the hair and the reflections, what have you. That said, the sort of rounded edge sort of brush thing can be nice, it can be very appealing. Whatever your jam, I won't kink shame. Unless that is your, you know, thing. Here we go, that's that bit there. I'll throw a little bit on the eyes there. Well, and then I'll do the shine there and there, and a little bit of shine across the top of the nose. Go, and then a bit of a shine mouth, bit of tongue, make the tongue look all lovely and wet. And then we're going to go down here and put a little bit of rim shine there and along the edge as well. That just to make it look like it's a sort of leathery sort of shape. You'll notice with sort of shiny and mirrory things like leather and what have you, you're going to have that reflection as a way of sort of mapping out the shape more than most things, and it'll get much more narrow and sort of compressed towards the edges of round objects. So if you are wanting to make something look more sort of metallic, the big takeaway is to put all your detail really hard into the edges. The stuff in the middle of it doesn't actually matter. The reflection really takes effect where it narrows to the edges, where that rounded surface distorts the reflection, and it gives it such a high amount of contrast that it compresses that reflection in, making it much, much more visible. A bit more there. It's a bit too much, so I'm going to have to pale that out a bit, I think. And then maybe a little bit more on this sort of wider section here. And then that'll do. Right, cool. a little bit here as well. Just not a very strong bit. I just want a bit there to sort of pull it out a little bit. Yep, I feel like that's working. Right, and now I'm going to grab my... Here, I'm going to grab another layer. Yeah, I'm just going to have this one called Glow. And I'll grab that sort of cyan color I was going to use. I'm going to make a selection of the eyes. I'm going to get in there with a soft airbrush. And I'm just going to very gently add in a bit of cyan glow to the bottom there. It's probably a bit too heavy, so I have to get some out. Get it there. And looking pretty good. Alright, I'll get my highlights here. I'm going to grab my big soft eraser and I'm just going to soften some of this. It's a bit strong as it is. I'm just going to lighten that a little bit. It's a bit too much, just a bit there like that. There we go. And a little bit there as well, just to pull it down a touch. Alright, looking decent. That will do. Alright, so before I finish up then, let's have a look what I want to have a look at. So I'll see if I want to soften the line art as well. So I'll grab my ink layer, and I'll get a copy of my color correction layer, and I'll take the grouping off for a second. You see what this one is. That's what the flats look like, right? And so what I'm going to do then is I'm going to grab my filter, filter, correction, adjust line width, and I'm going to treat the flats like it's line art, widen it up like that, and then I'm going to clip it to, I'm going to switch it to hard light. There it is. No, I want that on normal, sorry, I want this layer on hard light. I'm just going to lower the opacity on that, and just to help soften some of that line art there. And once that's done, I'll get rid of it because I want things like the black around the eyes to be a hard black. And the black around the nose, maybe, a bit harder. And of course the black around the collar. Groovy. That's looking okay. Alright, next thing I want to do is maybe warm some of the colours a little bit on the flats, just to make sure it's landing right. So I'm going to grab that, and I'll use my wand tool. Grab that there, and I'm just going to quickly warm up that pink a little bit. I feel like it's a little bit cold. Cooler, hang on. Oh, hang on, that's just the hair. Go. Here, and the skin. There, and Control U, and just want to warm that up a bit. Not quite that much, that's kind of orange. Better. Okey, and I'm going to grab my shading here and just do a bit of tuning in for some parts. So I want things like the shading in there to be a little bit darker, a little bit cooler. Oops. A little bit darker, a little bit cooler. Yeah, feel good about that. Maybe any other little last touches I want to do before I start on post-processing. That might be a little bit extra shading just around here, the corner of the mouth, just to pinch that in a little bit. And maybe pull this down here a touch as well, just to better define that snout, I reckon. That's a little better. And then a little bit of shading around there. There, that's working out. And a little bit under the eyes, maybe. And there. Yep, that's looking okay. And any other bits then I want to do, like see if there's any bits of shine I've missed. Or I want to add some. I'm thinking maybe I might do a bit of shine on the actual figure themselves, but that's blue, not white. Now I'll go to my regular brush there, so just a gentle little bit there. And a gentle little bit there as well. Right, and maybe more as I come down the shirt, just really sort of sell that shine a bit. There. Yeah, I feel like that's working. Alright, groovy. Now, last couple of bits of post-processing. What I might do is I'm going to grab the layer as a whole, sorry, the image as a whole, and what I'll do then is I might put a background on as well. So a nice simple background, just a simple shape one. So just above that, there, I'll grab myself the lasso tool, the marquee tool, grab a nice big square marquee, put it in there, and I'll pick a color that's going to be opposite to the warmish color there, so it'll be like a pale cyan green color, and so it'll give it a bit of contrast. I'll get my gradient, and I'll just throw that on there, just as a little, that's not the right button. Linear. Let's see if I get it right way around. No. There, and just lower that a smooch. Yeah, just something to sort of set it off against. Groovy. And then I might actually take the make a selection of the ink, and I'm just going to cut the highlights off the ink because I feel like they're actually deadening it a little bit. I don't like them. Right, groovy. And I'll lower you down a bit just to make the shading a bit darker. Nice. Alright, groovy. Now, next thing I'm going to do is a couple of little simple bits of post-processing. So one of the first ones is you can do a bit of subsurface scattering. So what I'll do is I'll make a selection of the shading, so control-click on the thumbnail. On my new layer here, I'll set that to screen, and then since I've got a selection, when I hit the Make Alpha Mask, it'll make a mask out of whatever I had selected. Meaning then that I've accidentally deleted the highlights. Grab that, sorry, I've got a new layer here. I'll grab that there and add that on. Alright, great. And now what that means is on this sort of screen layer here, set the screen, I can only draw where there was shading. So if I take it off of screen and put it to normal, and I go for a nice sort of green color here, which I'm not going to draw with, but will be, you'll see that the only place it'll let me draw is where there was shading, right? This can be really handy if I want to have something that is going to lighten, but only lighten things in that area. So if I go to screen now, and I go to a nice sort of red, or sort of warm red, like that, and I've got my brush here, what I can do is I can brush in, I'll zoom in so you can see it, and it'll only make it lighter and redder where there was shading. Right? This can be really good for subsurface scattering, so I'll get rid of it there on the leather banks, I don't want it there, but you can see it's a great way to have a bit of that sort of color vibrance on that sort of edge there, where the shading starts. And so I'll do the same thing there on the neck, and there. Oops, too much. But you've got to be careful you don't overdo it. There as well, and there. And that edge there, and it just gives you a little bit more of that sort of nice edge to your shading. Here on the boobs, I'm going to make it real big. Now, you could only really be necessary on skin, but it looks lovely on everything, so I tend to overuse it, but that's me. I'll even do it on concrete. Give me half a chance. Then get rid of the excess, come back in, and erase it down. And you can see it gives a much more sort of, a better sort of progression from your light to dark. Having that on there. There we go, a bit more there. Let's cut it out, and in. And same thing on the hair up here, a little bit more in, like that. And just gives it a bit more of that sort of variance for me to use. And a bit more on the tongue as well. Looks nice. And a bit of the neck. This will be nice. Groovy, 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 groovy. Up there. Alright, coolio. Now, that's one thing we do from post-processing. Next one thing we do is we can give it a bit of a sort of soft blur, or we can give it a bit more contrast. So one of the things you do for contrast is hit the contrast slider. But there's another thing you do. What I like to do is I'll go layer, merge visible to new layer, and then that'll give me this sort of pop. You can see there in the thumbnails panel, it's the whole image. I duplicate that, and now I go for filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to make a sort of blurry version of it. What this is for is I'm going to use this to make an effect out of it. So I'm going to make it pretty blurry, A bit more. Touch more. About that. Yeah, about 50. Yeah, about 50 looks good. Alright, then I'm going to go and where are we? Edit, tonal correction, and I'm going to do level correction. So what this will do is it'll let me sort of compress it in and really just sort of make it look like a deep fried meme. And what I'm doing is I'm generating some highlights and some lowlights that I can use then to up my contrast. So that there is probably what I want. And so that now, if I set that to overlay, it'll be a bit overly powerful when I put it first in. But you can see if I put it down in opacity a bit, to about there, it gives a lot of sort of pop and contrast to it that's more sort of regional. It's probably still a bit strong. Let's put that down a touch. Yeah, but you can see it just gives that extra bit of sort of buzz and impact to it. One of the other things you can do, new layer, set it to normal, lower the opacity just a smidge, give yourself a nice warm yellow, and then a really cool blue. It's kind of dark. Give yourself a big soft airbrush, and you essentially do a second sort of lighting pass. But I tend to start with big sort of gradient here, just so I've got a progression from my warm colors to my, where are we? My cool colors. So I'll go from warm to cool, like that. So there, and then bring it down. I'll start going in and adding some of the more clear bits of sort of shading areas where I want the color to be a bit cooler. There you go, a bit there as well. There, and there, there, but then also where I want to be really picking up some light, like on the huge boobs. And then when I switch that one to overlay as well, I'll have to lower the opacity down a bit more. You can see it just gives me a bit more of a sort of difference between my lighter and darker areas of tone. And I feel like that's working all right. Off. You. Yeah, a bit darker shading. I'm just going to duplicate my Lineart layer. Mine's coming out just a little bit too pale, so I'm just thickening it up a little bit there. Alright, groovy, and I'm just going to lower these down a little bit. Now the other thing you can do is you've got your duplicate of your image, and you can go lower the opacity on that, and this is how to get a bit of a soft focus. I'll zoom right in, and you can see I've got my duplicate here of that. I'm just going to go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, normal layer, and halfway opacity. I'm just going to put it here, and all it does is it just gives me a bit of like tone fringing and gives a bit of a sort of soft focus look. You can see when I turn it on and off, it gives that sort of soft look to it, like a sort of a misty, foggy look. So I'm just going to lower that a bit. I just want a little tiny bit of it. Lovely. There we are, and the image is then done. So this is done in what, 1 hour 20 minutes? We've gone through the whole thing step by step. Hopefully you like the new format. This is me doing the recording of the audio as I do the drawing. Hopefully this means I'll be able to get more done and more out for you guys to do. And I hope you enjoy the drawing. This is going to be the first of them in this format. If you like it, great. If you have suggestions for things you'd like to see in these draw-alongs, or you'd like to see in the bigger sort of tutorial videos, I'd love to hear about it. I'm currently working my way through the upper body video, where I'm doing the shoulders and neck, which involves a lot of the back and torso. So that one's getting a bit involved, as all my things do. But hopefully I'll have that one out the door in the next week or so. There's also a review coming up for something I can't talk about just yet, but I'm excited. I hope you are too. In the interim, it's been great. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers. You have a good day. Bye.